It's the Final Word Cricket Podcast with Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon. It is the afternoon after the afternoon before, something like that. Yesterday was when India won at the Oval. What a triumph it was. So it's now Tuesday, late afternoon, my time, probably nearly 2 in the morning, Jeff's time on Wednesday morning, something like that. And we have got another massive weekly show for you. If you are finding the Final Word for the first time, having listened to our daily shows, there might be quite a few of you out there, given the sheer volume of people who tuned in to the Day 5 Daily app. Welcome to our Final Word community. This is what we normally do. We spend about an hour and a half each week making this episode around the game around the world, the politics around the game, the issues around the game. On the weekend, we talk about the history of cricket on a program we call Storytime. And then each day of a test match, we will make the daily show, which by now you will be familiar with. With no further ado, I welcome Geoff Lemon. Hello, Geoff.
I feel like I know what we're doing now, which is nice. Sometimes I need a reminder. Often I need refreshers about very basic things. You know, are you wearing pants? Do you have your keys? Did you remember to put on your glasses? Are you looking for your glasses while wearing your glasses? The answer to all of those questions has been both yes and no at different times in my life when it should have been the other one. But at least here, in terms of what we do on this show, I feel like I know what's going on for today.
Outstanding. That's exactly how it should be. On this episode of The Final Word, the weekly episode, we are going to interview Emma John. In fact, I can let you in on something. We have already interviewed Emma John. I'm not letting the cat out of the bag to say this is not in sequence. Emma John has been writing in The Guardian in the last few days about the extraordinary documentary that Mark Butcher made for Sky Cricket, which I've had the pleasure of watching over the last few days during the test match. Watched the final episode today. Emma was writing about it too, essentially looking at the systemic racism in English cricket over time, not just inside the game, but around the game as well. So Emma spoke to a number of former England internationals who there's 21 black men and women who've played for England, and Butch spoke to a bunch of them, and Emma spoke to a bunch of them as well, and that was a very interesting conversation. So that'll be the second half of the show. Geoff, to start with, we should say that our Discord channel is popping off, which is very exciting. Our Discord channel is where members of our Patreon community can come and chat. Now, I must admit, I've been absent from there for a couple of weeks, for I am a very busy boy at the moment between radio, television, other commitments and all the rest of it. But it was lovely to drop in there this afternoon and have a chat, just to sort of see how things have been progressing. The sub-channels, when I last was on there was about 6 of them. Now there's about 16 of them. So you've been busy.
Yep. Other things have been happening. As far as popping off goes, do you remember the ad for, maybe it was a Black & Decker popcorn maker that was a television ad in the 90s, and it had corn popping, and maybe the music was the
Oh yeah. I remember absolutely, yeah, sure.
And just more and more popcorn got made, sort of Magician's Apprentice style, the unstoppable flood of popcorn. It's like that. That's how off it's been popping. There a bunch of people have had meetups at the Oval Test.
I love this.
And
I love
the
this.
Test before that.
This is a bit that, I mean, I knew they were in the offing, but because I've been away a little bit, I didn't realise they've actually happened. I'm sorry I wasn't at the meetups. In truth, I probably wouldn't have been able to have made them anyway. Not at this stage. That'll be more October for me when I have a slightly quieter month, but the very fact that these Final Word meetups are happening makes my heart swell. It's a lovely thing. So keep them coming. You can learn more about our Discord channel when we come to Nerd Pledge a little bit later. The reason I raised Discord, though, is because it directly links into the vaccine game, which is taking place on the 17th of September, 4 p.m. Okay. Dulwich Cricket Club, so that's 10 days from now. Eek, that scares me somewhat because I've done no work on it whatsoever other than drop into the Discord channel about half an hour ago. I'm recruiting a team to represent the Final Word against the Oval Dream Boys. The Oval Dream Boys are a team that is based... This won't surprise you.
A grudge match. This is our grudge match. The Final Word, the Oval Dream Boys, they've always hated each other. They're like River Plate and Boca Juniors in Buenos Aires. Oh, there's bad blood, let me tell you. It goes way back.
Yeah, it won't surprise you to know that the Oval Dream Boys are based out of the Oval there, where India, of course, won that wonderful Test match yesterday. So Felix White, who was on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, talking about his new book, he is part of the Dream Boys, and a number of other friends of ours from in and around the game, including John Surtees from Surrey, who'll be leading the team on the 17th, Friday afternoon, the 17th September. I need to recruit a team. A lot of people on Discord have volunteered themselves to be there or to assist me, but I'm struggling on the bit where I find 11 human beings or 10 to play alongside me. I've got a couple of Final Word adjacent or former Final Word guests who are playing, but plenty of spots to fill. So please get in touch with me directly if you want to be part of this game. Maybe Twitter/Discord is the way to do it. finalwordcricket@gmail.com might be another. The point here is that we aren't. I am going to struggle to do the number of hours that one might normally do for this sort of thing. So the more help you can give me along the way, the better. There are people, Jeff, looking into streaming the game, which is really cool. Any support on that's appreciated as well. There'll be a bar running at Dulwich afterwards because they've shuffled their bloody juniors presentation night for us. So it's up to us to go into the bar afterwards and eat all of the food and drink all of the drinks to make it worth their while. So you kind of get the picture. It's going to be a nice social event. Lovely people. So be there on the 17th.
I would be there if I were not in a different country with strict laws forbidding me from leaving this country and being there. If not, I would be doing exactly as you say.
Oh, and one more thing, Jeff, before we get into the meat and drink of our show. This arrived in the post. I'm showing it to the YouTube camera a couple of days ago.
Describe it for our audio-only audience.
Well, it's a book by the name of Jimmy and the Wozzler. And as soon as I undid the envelope, I sent you a photo of it, Jeff, thinking that, well, first of all, one of our Storytime devotees or one of our patrons must have bought this for me and found my address somehow and sent it through. And Jeff goes, no, that was me. That was you. Tell me how you found the book Jimmy and the Wozzler. And by way of background, the old Wozzler was a delivery that one of the former cricketers that we've talked about on Storytime called his... Did he call it his quicker ball or something like that?
Maybe... Yeah, it probably wasn't his wrong-un, but yeah, it was...
it might have been his wrong-un, actually. He might have called his wrong-un the old Wozzler. I think, in fact, I'm sure it was. It was the old Wozzler. Yeah. So I can't remember which cricketer it was, but it's become used euphemistically as we've gone through. Okay, please continue.
This is how I discovered the book, because I was trying to... I had a mental blank about who employed the Wozzler, who got the Wozzler out on occasions when a Wozzler would be useful to have out. And I was like, God, what was his name? And I'd forgotten that his name was Jim Sims, which how could I forget?
Yes, of course, yes.
Very nearly the made-up boyfriend of Muriel in Muriel's wedding. And so I typed in, to my eternal regret, I typed in cricket old Wozzler. Every result that came up was our podcast or variations of our podcast, except there was one link through to an old books repository where for about £6.50 this edition of a book called Jimmy and the Wozzler was on offer for sale. One copy left, no indication of what was in it, what it was about. Was it actually about Jim Sims and his bowling? All I could do was speculate, but I thought, look, I can either buy this or not buy this, but as if I'm not going to buy it. And it was a UK-only service that sent these books out. So luckily I know your address and punched it in. And now you're the proud owner.
Well, the plot thickens somewhat because this book originally belonged to Dawn Melbourne, 15 Scott Street, Cavelli Park, Adelaide, South Australia. So Dawn Melbourne from Adelaide in old-fashioned cursive handwriting that you might have...
How did it end up in the UK?
Yeah, it was £1.95 from Dobson's in the UK. Do you want me to read you the blurb? Okay. Would that be helpful?
Because I've got no idea what it's about yet.
Okay, let's give it a go. To Jimmy, an orphan, life was far from being the enjoyable adventure it was for his friends. Rather, it was a long succession of embarrassments. Shyness and his lack of confidence made his life a misery, and he suffered long the torments and bullying of his companions. His gang made him the object of their scorn, and to Jimmy there seemed no hope. His schooling was a disaster, and because he was so shy, he rarely spoke, even to ask a question. And the Wozzler? Well, wazzling was an invention of Jimmy's newfound friend, the tramp, who lived in a cave in a local slag
Look,
heap.
I don't know about this. This is going off track here.
It really is. Let me just read that last sentence. Who lived in a cave in a local slag heap.
Oh, okay.
Jimmy's friendship with the old Irishman led to many startling changes in his character until finally he accomplished an act which demanded the highest degree of self-confidence. Well, not like Prince's act of self-confidence. If not downright bravery. Jimmy had found himself. This new book by S.B. Whitfield, author of The Amazing Mr. Fangle, will add immeasurably to his reputation as a first-class storyteller for children of all ages. Well, there you go.
Well,
I wonder what year it was, just to continue with this.
It sounds like, I reckon, early 60s is my point.
Oh, you've gone close there, 1967. So, okay, well, between now and the next edition of the show, it looks like I might be able to plough through that over a couple of sittings. So I will read Jimmy and the Wazzler, and I'll give you a book report on next week's Final Word.
How is it that it has no relation to cricket or Jim Sims? I was like, surely this is a book about Jim Sims and the Wazzler. Obviously, this author must have heard about Sims and the Wazzler at some point to turn that into some sort of children's book. But, I mean, yeah, the suggestion is, I don't know, get ready to meet the amazing Mr. Fangle also sounds a bit suspect on that side of the legend.
Yeah, and I wonder whether between now and the end of his illustrious Test career, Jimmy Anderson might be able to do something that involves his old Wazzler. Oh gosh, that sounds a bit suggestive. Let me work on that. That might require some fine tuning, but you can see where I'm going. Hey Jeff, before we go any further, we have to have an emergency session of
Sachin.
It's your birthday. Happy birthday.
Sachin. Sachin.
It's your birthday. Happy birthday.
Sachin.
Take it away, Lise.
Jeff. It's happy birthday, Sachin, with a twist of sorts. Now, if you were watching The Daily Show yesterday, I told the little story of what happened to me at Stumps when the game was over. I took a photo of India celebrating. Because there are no photographers that sit at the Vauxhall end of the ground, they normally congregate at the pavilion end of the ground in order to get the shot of the gasometer, which makes perfect sense. They want to get the frame that includes the famous gasometer and the field of play and the player celebrating. Well,
The galloping gasometer.
the galloping gasometer. Well, because I was sitting at the other end, at the Vauxhall end, I was the only person. I mean, I haven't seen any other photos with a proper camera of when umpire Wolf's finger went up to give out Jimmy Anderson, speaking of Jimmy's old Wazzler, to confirm the test match was over yesterday at the Oval. And that photo also popped off, so much so that within about 10 minutes, Cheteshwar Pujara had pinched it and bunged it on his own Twitter. And needless to say, he wasn't the last person to do this. While we were recording The Daily Show and talking about Pujara's theft, which was all in good spirits and all the rest of it, we've got a long-standing invitation for Cheteshwar to join, I should say, the show, and hopefully this will help advance that somewhat. Sachin Tendulkar was doing the same bloody thing. Sachin has tweeted. I mean, we've got a fixation with Sachin's Twitter account on our podcast, whether it's wishing people birthdays or celebrating the militaristic nature of the Modi administration or anything in between. We love and we are fascinated by Sachin's Twitter account. And he has pinched one of my bloody photos to his 35 million followers and picked up a handy 25,000 retweets, if you don't mind, umpire, with no credit. So I immediately quote tweeted Sachin and champed him. Said that I should get a photo. Can you please credit who took this photo, please, champion? And that was that has meant, Jeff, needless to say, my Twitter mentions have been a fucking circus for nearly 24 hours now, and it's showing no sign of slowing down either. All thanks to Sachin and his Twitter account, which we've loved for so many years.
I have thoroughly enjoyed the byplay. I read through a fair bit of it just for my own entertainment. All of the people getting angry at you because you didn't put a watermark on your photo. So
this is a real thing. I'm copying pelters because I didn't put a watermark on a recreational photo that I put up purely to celebrate India's victory. And look, at the end of the day, I don't care that much that Sachin hasn't credited credited me. It just would have been nice because I would have picked up, thousands of followers in the process. That's all. I can't complain though. But it's been a fun adventure. We had some other, like the Rajasthan Royals credited me in their tweet using the photo. I think it's going in. Well, I know it's going in a couple of publications. Our great mate Dan Toomey, who we used to work on White Line Wireless with, is printing me out a big copy of it for when I get back to Australia, whenever that happens to be.
From Fisher Classics.
From Fisher Classics. So yeah, it's been a nice thing to happen to have had a photo that seemingly no one else has that angle, and you'll be able to find it on my Twitter or on Sachin's Twitter.
Yeah, quite funny. Also quite funny that various outlets have been putting up the picture of Kohli doing the trumpet at the Barmy Army, and I saw one, can't remember which disreputable rag it was, but I think the headline was, "The world is divided over Virat Kohli miming the trumpet." I do not think that is true. I do not think the world is divided. I do not think there is any global divide about this. I do not think anybody, frankly, gives a flying fuck, aside from a very, very niche part of a very niche market. Who cares about these sort of things?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, okay, so our friend and colleague from the Almanac, Lawrence Booth, tweeted about this, which I think was probably the catalyst for a lot of the stories that followed, and I appreciate his perspective. I mean, I think it's a valid one. That he said he finds it weird when a top class sportsman isn't content with winning the game, having totally outplayed the opposition, but he wants to stick it to the fans too. Like, I get where Lawrence is coming from, but on the other side of it, I also think that it is pretty funny that Kohli turned to the Barmy Army where they were sitting and mimed the trumpet. They've got a new trumpeter, Jeff. I don't know if you've picked up on this, but the Barmy Army have got someone new doing it. I saw him busking.
He's a bit nervous. He sounds a bit, you can hear him. He's not quite confident on there's only 3 pegs on a trumpet. Right? Hot tip. I'm going to let you in on a secret here. There's only 3. It's not that complex. But he doesn't sound like he's fully believes in what he's doing.
Yeah, well, he certainly has a front. So I saw him doing a bit for social media, busking in the Vauxhall Tunnel at the front of the station a couple of days ago, playing, Jerusalem, followed by I can't remember, another Barmy Army classic. I don't know what it was. But yeah, my sense is
they've only got about 2 songs.
Yeah, I'm not as anti-Barmy Army as other people are. Like, there are a lot of people out there who think the Barmy Army are a bunch of, sunburnt gammon who, all a bunch of old white blokes, and have a very strong view about that. And I'm sure to an extent that is part of their clientele. I also think the Barmy Army do a lot of great work for charity and have been huge supporters of the game and enable people to travel to watch England play who otherwise wouldn't have got the chance, and some wonderful moments, not least, we actually talked to Emma John briefly about Dean Headley, but that day in 98-99 when they stormed the MCG when England won is one of my most defining cricket memories. So I think they do a lot of good as well, even if they are a little bit self-referential, singing about themselves all day long and all the rest of it. But I just get the feeling the new trumpeter, you say a bit of a lack of confidence on the tools. I'm not quite sure he knows the right time to play the songs. I think I think there are moments where the trumpet should be out, and there are moments when the trumpet should not be out, and I don't think he's quite bridged that yet. And that might be why Virat was inspired to mimic that upon taking Joe Root's wicket. That's just a hunch of mine.
There's some real old Wasler areas. There are times when the trumpet should be out and times when it should not. And the other point I would make is Lawrence saying, not sure why a player would want to stick it to the fans. That's the group of fans who spend their entire time at the test match sticking it to the players. That is all they do. That is their purpose. Their stated purpose, their intent when they go there is to get into that sort of relationship with the players. And so if it becomes a bit reciprocal, and if it's good-natured, now it's not like Virat's dropping the strides and giving them the old Burnley tunnel or something. He's not. It's playful. It would be seen as a bit of fun.
Remember where in the 90s that was quite a big thing? To moon someone was a real
out the window
thing.
Of a taxi was always a good one. That was a popular one, out the back seat of the cab as you left a night spot, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so, Samoon. Wow. Yeah. So, well, look, maybe Coley can take that upon advisement. Maybe he can. Maybe get the old Wazza out as well. Who's to know?
Save that for Old Trafford. You know?
Well, anything goes in that party stand, as you know, Jeff. In the permanent temporary stand on the eastern side of the ground there at Old Trafford, anything goes. The good, the bad, the ugly of the game. On the field, or what's about to be on the field, Jack Leach back in the squad. A little bit surprised by that, actually. I thought they might have just not gone beyond Leach, but I thought that maybe, given it's Old Trafford, they might play Matt Parkinson, knowing that their Chris Silverwood's stated position is he doesn't want to give players debuts at the Ashes. Now, he may not get a chance to live through that if a number of England players don't come to Australia, and that's a very real thing at the moment. Make no mistake, there are a number of England players with school-age kids who do not fancy at all the idea of their kids finishing term, coming out, being with them for 5 or 6 days and going home again. And I'm sure we'll get all the usual stuff about, back in the good old days, they used to get the ship for 6 months. You know, Des Redford would swim from, Dover to Calais, do a tumble turn and swim back, as they said on Martin Malloy many years ago. It isn't, industry standards have changed and community standards have changed. So players expect to be able to have their family with them, especially in these conditions. So I'm sure that will be resolved, as you pointed out a couple of weeks ago, Jeff, but it's the problem with school term and how it runs right up until the point where if they came out to Oz at that stage, they'd only get 5 or 6 days with the players, so before having to go back the other way. So that's a bit of a watch this space. But on that basis, maybe they will need to have players make their test debut in Australia. Nevertheless, Jack Leach plays instead of Parkinson here, and Josh Butler returns to the squad. Now, I didn't think he would. I kind of got the impression that he would miss both test matches with his newborn child. But the fact that Josh is back, who's going to miss the 11 this week for England?
Johnny.
I mean, it's probably Bairstow, isn't it? He's had a pretty good series, with the exception of, obviously he gets bowled by Bumrah yesterday.
He's had an okay.
He's had an okay series,
but he's made 20s and 30s. He hasn't, and he's made fourth ball ducks and whatnot. I mean, I've never been entirely convinced by him as a test player. He had that one brilliant year where he made 1,600 runs or whatever it was. Certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, he's been capable of doing things like the last day at Headingley, where he makes whatever he made 45 or something in quick time, and that can be really valuable on its day. But it's not necessarily valuable. I mean, he's made a lot of very early ducks as well when he came in India, batting at 3 and was getting out second ball, third ball, fourth ball. There have been a lot of times when he hasn't done the business for England, put it that way. Yeah,
he hasn't made himself undroppable, I suppose. What do you think about the Parkinson sort of idea? I mean, a wrist spinner in Australia, to my way of thinking, especially one that can turn the ball like this guy. And it's not like he's a kid anymore either. He's 26. It feels like very capable cricketer. And I know he's not playing in the championship right this very moment, but body of work stuff across the year. He's playing white ball cricket for England periodically.
Well,
he's been in squads. Wouldn't you just play him?
He put in a real shift when Lancashire were trying to bowl at Warwickshire on the last day of their match the other week. It was pretty flat. It was very defensive. Parkinson had to bowl 45 overs in that innings. There wasn't much doing, but he still picked up 4 wickets. He made things happen. He bowled Dom Sibley around his legs when Sibley was looking to be very defensive, and just tried to sweep one away, and it got around behind the pads and bowled him, got it to turn that much out of the rough. He got big turn as well, had one caught it slip into the bargain, and got that bit of extra bounce as well. He was able to rag them where nobody else really looked a threat. And so, that seemed notable, that in a match where really nothing was happening on that last day, he was the one player who was able to make something happen, to get something happening. It'd be pretty hard if you were Jack Leach and you got sent back to Somerset and then another spinner gets jumped back into the squad ahead of you. That's not really looking after Leach, but is Jack Leach going to win England the Ashes in Australia? Kind of doubt it. Is a leg spinner going to be maybe more use than a left-arm orthodox? Finger spinners don't generally come to Australia and have a good time.
No, that's right. That was certainly the case for Moeen Ali last time around, and he's the incumbent spinner right now. So do they play 2 spinners at Old Trafford? Probably, because Moeen's in the top 7. Anyway, time will tell. There's only 2 days until the next test, so we'll find out soon. As for India, I don't think anyone really knows whether Rohit Sharma and Cheteshwar Pujara are playing this week after their niggles. We don't know an awful lot more about the support staff who contracted COVID either. In addition to Ravi Shastri, there was 2 more positive cases, we believe, but they've been sort of keeping a fairly straight bat about all of this. So I suppose from India's perspective, it's just all about ramming home the advantage and winning 3-1. The incentive is there to actually win the series rather than simply to draw it at 2 apiece. So, yeah, I think that India will almost certainly be in a position where they can rotate their fast bowlers. Mohammad Shami was a niggle, but he was wearing the red vest the whole week. I don't think it was by that I mean he was running out drinks and running out gloves. So whatever the niggle was didn't preclude him from doing that. So maybe
he
Shami
wasn't on the table getting his quad intensively worked on.
Yeah, exactly. So presumably Shami returns and they can maybe shuffle out Umesh Yadav or Siraj, good shout. Yeah.
Siraj has played non-stop, so you would think that he would miss the last test in order to have a rest. He looked a bit cooked at the Oval. He was the one bowler who wasn't really influential at the Oval. I suppose Bumrah is maybe due a rest as well, but I don't think they will rest him. He's just too valuable. And when you look at the forecast, that test is going to be interrupted. They're India. They're definitely not going to be bowling 90 over days anyway. They'll be bowling 80 tops.
Yes.
And if you throw rain into the equation, maybe they're bowling anywhere between 10 and 60 overs in a day. So even when they are bowling, there won't be that as heavy a load on the quicks.
Let's shift gears to the England-New Zealand women's series. I'm not sure how much of this you've caught so far, Jeff, but Chelmsford was a very easy win for the home side. Tammy Beaumont made 97. They picked up Susie Bates and Sophie Devine in the space of the first 4 overs, which was effectively game over. It was quite a sloppy performance from New Zealand. Far different at Hove, though. So I went from the test match on Saturday down to Hove to do that game for television. And New Zealand, I mean, they did what they needed to do, didn't they? Early wickets, which they failed to do in the previous game. They fielded magnificently. Hannah Rowe running around at deep backward square took a stunning catch. It was a great snaffle at point. They pegged the stumps down at one stage. So they were able to keep England in check. Sophie Devine at one stage was on a hat-trick in her 100th T20 international. And then she walked out and batted 50 quickly. To lay the base. Susie Bates was run out early to Maddie Villiers, who run out. She executed one run out and took 3 screaming catches, one in the deep where her whole body was off the ground diving forward, and one of her own bowling, which was hammered back at her. But in the end, they couldn't drag it back enough to keep New Zealand to, I think they needed to defend about 127 or something like that. So it was a much better, higher standard of game, albeit a lower scoring game. But yeah, great to see Sophie Devine, who missed all that cricket earlier this year with trying to look after her mental health, back leading this team, making runs, taking wickets and getting them on the board early in the series.
Yeah, Maddie Villiers is a live wire in that sense. Makes things happen, put it in inverted commas, makes things happen. Got to go to India. I really like Hannah Rowe as well, what she's done in the team the last little while. She's a player with, what do they say? She's got a bit about her, Hannah Rowe. Got a...
Do you remember when we met her? Do you remember when we met her at the 2017 World Cup when we were thrown? I don't know if you. We were sitting. We were doing TMS. It was you, me, and perhaps Lydia. And at the lunch interval when we were filling, we just had Hannah Rowe brought up to us. And I mean, with respect to Hannah, she was probably 19 at the time and played about 2 games. Certainly hadn't played in that World Cup. And we had to try and find a way of doing about 20 minutes on air with her, interviewing her. I recall it being quite hard graft, but she was obviously very friendly, which is why she was doing the media rounds. And yeah, now very much a part of that seam attack in both 20 and 50 over cricket.
Also noticed that Jess Kerr has kept doing the thing she does, which is take early wickets. With these crazy in-swingers, she's rivaling Megan Shute for the UFO in-swinger, and she was doing this through the games that she was playing in the last 9 months or so as well. But, starting at almost off the cut strip and then, in it goes and somehow just curves in and hits the stumps. So she's come into her own, Jess Kerr, in that she's had the Tim Wigmore older sibling syndrome. The older sibling's not as good at cricket as the younger one, because if your younger sister is Amelia Kerr and she's in the team at 16 and bowling ripping leg breaks and making double tons, it's a bit hard to match up. But Jess Kerr has started to has successfully hit her stride as that opening swing bowler. So that's been nice to see. But I do note look, New Zealand got a win. I said they might not get one on tour. They did get one, but still entirely reliant on Sophie Devine. She had to take the wickets. She had to make the runs. And basically when she doesn't do it, they don't win.
Yeah, I should say in passing that Susie Bates played her 126 T20 the other night as well, which means she's played more than anybody, more runs than anyone in women's T20s. She can't bowl on this tour. She said to me last week...
She's played as many T20s as Shane Watson made runs at Mohali in 2010. It's a big milestone for any player.
Yes, there's some story time for you there, some connecting the dots. No, but she can't bowl anymore, and she told me that she's actually quite glad she can't bowl at the moment. She's quite enjoying getting more time in the nets to bat at training rather than having to go out and bowl. So you mentioned Amelia Kerr, they're missing her. I mean, it's pretty obvious that they're missing her. And that's not a reflection on Lee Kasparek, by the way, who's been really effective. Her numbers are outstanding, but she did have 54 runs taken off her in 4 overs at Chelmsford, which is the most ever for a New Zealand bowler in that form of the game. So hopefully Amelia is going well. She didn't want to make the trip, again, sort of for mental health reasons. She wanted to not go through the fairly rigorous COVID processes and bubbles and all the rest of it. And fair enough. So that's the England-New Zealand Women's Series. It continues at Taunton on Thursday in the short form. And then we're into 5 one-day internationals up at Leicester and Derby and all the usual places that the women get sent at this time of year. So I'll be at all of those, and we'll keep a watching brief on it on the Final Word week to week.
The Isle of Skye. Like Bonnie Prince, whatever his name was.
Yeah, well, it's the, put it this way, they play at the grounds of the counties, Jeff, that you don't know an awful lot about, which you've said before on the show. It's like all the counties that you don't have a huge relationship with, that's where the women are playing.
The ones in the middle.
Yeah, the ones in the middle, that's it. Speaking of
they're the ones I've spent most time at, actually. I've spent a lot of time at Derbyshire's ground, and I spent a lot of time at Leicestershire.
Yeah, that's true.
So and a fair bit of time at Worcester, actually, at New Road. So maybe I know them better than some of the others.
In Canterbury too, I should say. That's another ground you've done a couple of games at. So fair enough. Speaking of the New Zealand team, the men, they're in Bangladesh, in Dhaka to be precise, playing 5 T20s. An interesting one where they've sent everyone who isn't in their World Cup squad in order to fulfill their responsibilities as a touring team, as a good global citizen. New Zealand are like, no, that's okay. We'll make it work. Nice contrast there between the way New Zealand interpret these matters and some other countries. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. I mean, look at what India did with Sri Lanka a couple of months ago. I was talking with Matt Floyd, my colleague from the Middlesex Stream, who was over there doing that series, and his impression is that we're going to see a lot more of India being able to send 2 teams out at the same time where required if COVID continues to make travelling difficult. So New Zealand are in Dhaka on that basis. They got bowled out for 60 in the first game, which wasn't ideal. Mustafiza, who's had a really good couple of months, took 3 for... But then Bangladesh were able to defend 141 in the second game. Tom Latham, who's captaining this New Zealand team, made 65 not out, but it wasn't enough. They fell 4 runs short. And then, Jeff, in the third game, New Zealand bounced back. They bowled out Bangladesh for 76 after Henry Nichols made 36 not out to get them to 128 first. And our man, Ajaz Patel, he took 4 for 16. Of course, we both loved the way that he went about it against England at Edgbaston a few months ago, earlier in the summer. But yes, he's making an impact with the white ball too.
He's one of those beautiful players who looks like a club cricketer, probably is a club cricketer, and yet just has the level of skills to be able to bump things up. I was just thinking that when you were talking about Matt Floyd and the Middlesex broadcast, if Felix runs the Oval Dream Boys, you and Matt Floyd could be the Lord's Stream Boys.
Oh, that is so good. Maybe we should be. Floydie is an excellent cricketer. He made a first-class 100, Floydie, so for Oxford against Cambridge many years ago in the varsity game. So we used to play together years ago, so I'm sure he'll be up for that. Just before we move off Bangladesh, of course, I missed this when they pumped Australia a few weeks ago. They're actually not in the T20 World Cup. I mean, they could make it, but they've got to go through the qualification process. The ICC will have you believe that the T20 World Cup begins with, gosh, is it 12 teams down to 10 or something like that? But make no mistake, that qualification tournament just before is not the World Cup. It's a qualifier that happens just before the World Cup. So Bangladesh, under Mahmudullah, who's captaining them at the moment, will have to get out of a group that includes Scotland, Oman and Papua New Guinea. Now, on current form, they'll shit it in. But nevertheless, that they are going to be playing. That might actually play to their advantage, actually, getting some cricket in which isn't practice matches, actually full
Match
internationals,
practice.
match practice there in situ.
Yeah.
I think they're playing those they're playing those in Oman, aren't they? So that'll be before they move over to
Man Oman.
Man
with
Oman.
Rob Guest.
They're going to knock the teams that don't win into
Yeah,
the pool.
they're going to push PNG into the pool, push Oman, push Scotland into the pool.
If you're one of our new
tonight.
Indian watchers and listeners, that's going to be quite hard to explain. YouTube Man O Man 90s pool, and I don't know, you might find some fun stuff.
Can I also note that so I've been having some correspondence with Rushan Alam, who hosts the Bangla Cricket Podcast, who is completely perplexed that on various recent scorecards, including some from the BCB, they've been listing Mahmudullah as Mahmud space Ullah. And he's like, it's not two names. Rushan is like, this has never been two names.
Yeah.
There's never been any debate about this. What is going on here? But Mahmud Ullah has played a few games as opposed to Mahmudullah, who's
That's
who's been
a
getting
real
around.
howler, especially if the BCB are putting out those cards.
I think it was a BCB one. I won't swear to it, but I think that was how it. Maybe it was on the. I think it was on the team sheet, on the paper team sheet that they'd printed out and handed around at the ground because someone had put a photo up of it. So yeah, apparently, or as per my who was there? Is it LL Cool J, right? With the Mama's going to knock you out. That was my favourite gag of the 2015 World Cup when Bangladesh took out England in the semis. Mahmudullah's going to knock you out. He did.
Jeff, let's stay in that broad corner of the world and talk about Pakistan for a moment. I am not across this tale or this yarn whatsoever. Misbah Al-Haq no longer the coach of Pakistan. Please inform me.
Well, he's quit, ostensibly. He's decided that COVID life sucks. He's done 2 years as the coach. He's got one more left on his contract. And they announced their World Cup squad, their T20 World Cup squad, and within a few hours, Misbah had also done a press conference that said, I'm done, because I don't want to go back into another, the next 6 or 8 months or whatever it is will be very intense with travel and bubbles, and he doesn't feel up to it. So it's sort of that Amelia Kerr style of thing, which I think we're seeing more and more of. He said, I understand that the timing may not be ideal was his diplomatic approach, but he said, I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind for the upcoming challenges. And so that also means that just after that, Waqar Younis, who's the bowling coach, said he'll quit as well, because he said, I came into this job with Misbah and I will go out of it with Misbah.
Oh, right.
I came into this world with nothing and I will go out with nothing as well. So
Interesting.
they were together. They were bros in that capacity, and so they've decided to go out at the same time, which is, it's really sweet in a way. It's really nice friendship areas. Best friend friendship with Wasim Akram ended. Best friend is Waqar Younis.
Perhaps my favourite all-time meme being referenced there, if you're not familiar. Okay, well, duly noted. That's a shame, because I kind of thought that the Misbah era, going almost immediately from captain to coach, he could end up having sort of the longest reign in charge that anyone's ever had in Pakistan. But that
and I
wasn't
was
to be.
thinking of Misbah just yesterday, because I was noting that India had whitewashed the tour of London, having won at Lords and having won at the Oval. And so I was thinking about the previous teams to whitewash the tour of London. The last one was Pakistan in 2016, and before that the Australians in 2015.
2015,
won 2-0 on the tour of London. So I was thinking about Misbah and the push-ups at Lords, and Yasir Shah at the Oval and all the rest of it. But now he's gone. His beautiful bearded visage will grace our screens as Pakistan coach no more, until probably he gets the job back in about 2 years' time, because that's how things roll.
I made some joke at the time in 2016 about it being when they won in London, didn't they? Pakistan. They didn't win anywhere else. They lost at Old Trafford and they lost at Edgbaston. It was a Desmond. It was a 2-2 result. Something to the effect of it was the reverse Brexit, where I tried to draw some parallel between Pakistan loving London and London hating Brexit and the rest of the country. Anyway, something like that. It was tortured, I'm sure. Right, so that's what's going on in Pakistan. Bringing things back to where I am in the UK, we're not going to do a full county cricket round up today because we're halfway through a round. All I would say is that last week, and we'll do this properly at the end of the second round. Is what I mean. So we're in the divisional phase at this point. So it's the race through September, the race for Lords, whatever they're calling it.
It's not a race. It's not a competition.
Notts having a huge innings win over Somerset, though. I think most people looked at the Division 1 table when it was framed up and thought, well, this could be the year for Somerset. But they were pumped by Notts, and then they were beaten even more brutally by Yorkshire inside 2 days. So they've had 2 innings defeats to start the divisional phase. And I would go as far to say that Somerset season is over. And now Notts have leapfrogged them. They're in second. Yorkshire are on top, which could mean, provided Notts knock off Lancashire in the round that's currently being played, they're in day 2 of their match at the moment. And it could mean we have a winner-takes-all final round between Yorkshire and Notts. We'll build on this next week. And if things keep trending that way, wouldn't that be wonderful? Just as it was in 2016 when Yorkshire were playing Middlesex at Lords, and Middlesex got the job done with like 20 minutes to go or something like that, and when Essex played Somerset down in Taunton a couple of years ago in that rain-affected game, that was also winner takes all. So yeah, that'd be a nice way to end the round robin of the divisionals phase, and then we have the Bob Willis Trophy after that between teams 1 and 2, which will be a 5-day game at Lords to take us into October. So we'll keep an eye on the county championship through this month of September, with it all really heating up. And Jeff, with that all said, I think before we go to our break, we should find time for just a little bit of
Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge. It is the game that we play with the people on our Patreon page. It's a reverse quiz, the Final Word's own reverse quiz, in which you quiz us. What happens is that we need help to support the show. We need people to contribute to fund us making the show twice a week, and people, bless them, do that, and they send in contributions, but not a normal round number of currency, a very specific number, because that number relates to cricket in some way. For instance, our nerd pledger today is Doc Gowland. G'day, Doc. I'll have an appendix out if there's any going cut rate. Don't need it. What's it there for? Weird little squidgy bit of, leftover primordial junk to, digest raw vegetable matter or something. Get rid of it. Doc Gowland has sent in $2.61 in Australian dollars. So, 261, that's the number, which means it could mean 26.1, 261, 261,000, any sort of variation on 261. And I have left this to Adam to try to interpret 261 in a way that will be pleasing for me and for you.
And hopefully it'll be pleasing for you, Doc. Noting that I didn't pay attention to the currency, so I'm about to do something that's got nothing to do with Australian cricket, but I hope you appreciate the link back to our previous conversation.
And I look forward to having this as a revisit on Storytime when we have to work out what the real number means.
Okay, so this is very relevant to a game of county championship cricket going on right now, where Middlesex have piled on about 700 for 5 down at Hove, Sussex playing 6 teenagers at the moment, which is very unusual. Sam Robson, former Australian under-19 player and England Test player, Sam Robson made 253. And as he was batting today, I was looking up who's made the highest scores for Middlesex all time, thinking to myself that he's a decent chance of going all the way to the top. The highest score ever for Middlesex was 331 by Jack Robertson, in 1949 at New Road, the ground you were talking about a little while ago. A man who played in that glory era for Middlesex after the war and should have played a lot more than 11 test matches, alas. So I was already looking through this chart when I saw the number come in, 261. And 261, I'm like, aha, that's a very relevant number to something that you and I have talked about before, Jeff, and relates to Middlesex, because 261 is what John Carr made in 1994 at Lords against Gloucestershire. Let me tell you why this is good. And you're going to eventually you're going to remember this, because I think you and I have talked about it before. Maybe not on story time, but we've talked about it in our private time.
Just that's what recreationally.
We do. That's what we do. We talk about these matters. So John Carr was a diligent, gutsy batsman who it was appropriate that he played for Middlesex because he was born on a house that was adjoining Lords. He actually retired.
This is as opposed to John Le Carre, who wrote The Spy Who Came In From the Cold.
It is definitely as opposed to that. He retired in 1989 to go into banking, but he made a comeback in 92, and by 94 he's like a 10-year veteran of the club, kind of doing his thing. He knows his game. Anyway,
He
so
retired to go into banking.
well, you know, imagine
Really?
it wasn't unusual for players to finish their careers prematurely in the sort of. You have to remember, they were 6-month contracts back then, so it wasn't
Yeah.
completely unusual if you had a better career with more money to move on to that. That wouldn't perhaps happen so
It
much
just
these
makes
days.
me think that, like, all of the Bay 13 guys who would have been leaning over the fence going, "You are a banker," it would have been apt.
He would have been, yes, I actually am, albeit briefly.
Yes.
So he's
Would
back
you
in,
like some financial advice?
He's back in 92, and this is 94, so we're 2 years on from that. And he's having one hell of a season. And we're in September 94, when Mark Ramprakash is out at 45 for 3. Of course, he was Middlesex before he was Surrey. John Carr walks in. 289 balls later, he's 261 not out when Middlesex declare at 513 for
clip.
7. It's a really good clip, especially then, pre T20 and all the rest of it. He had great support from Paul Weeks, who made 94. Paul, who I mentioned Hampstead before in the context of Matty Floyd. Paul, who played for Hampstead as well for a long time, and I once hit him for a 6 at the main ground there at Leamington Road, where Jeff, you and I did a live show a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Anyway, so he makes this 261. And then Middlesex have their final game of the season against Northants called off for rain. Well, they play like a day, but he doesn't bat in it. So that's his final innings of the season. His season finishes 78, 171, 136, 106, 40, 62, 261, not out. Now, when I say 94 in the county championship, Jeff, you might remember a chap by the name of BC Lara, who was playing up the motorway at Warwickshire that season.
Doing okay.
And made 9 centuries, famously, including his unbeaten 501. You probably know the story.
Including 8 in a row, I think. Hey?
Yes.
8 in consecutive innings or something like that. And who was it who'd brought him there? It was our mate who got hit in the head half an hour into his Test career, Andy Lloyd.
Andy Lloyd, that's
in
right.
1984.
That's right.
Who was running the show at Warwickshire at the time and was the one who in charge of recruiting Lara.
So Lara finishes the season with a truly ridiculous 2,066 runs at 89.8. 9 tons, just bonkers numbers across the board. And Carr, John Carr, Kazi, as he's known, that's his nickname, Kazi.
Oh, good. That's good. That's original, yeah.
Finished the season with, in the county championship, on the back of that incredible run, 1,321 runs at 88, so just beneath Lara with 5 centuries. So a great season, for the veteran, just below Lara. But because he made 102 for Middlesex A against England A back in April, which was a first-class fixture, and he made 50-odd not out against the New Zealanders in a tour game, and he made 55 not out against Cambridge, also a first-class game back in that era. His overall first-class season was 1,542 runs at 90.7, thus edging out Lara. John Carr was the leading man on the first-class averages in the season where Brian Lara made an unbeaten 501, made 2,066 runs at 89.8. It's one of those great trivia questions you occasionally hear around the traps over here. When he finished playing first-class cricket a couple of years later, he joined the TCCB, which became the ECB, and he's been running cricket ops and county cricket ever since. I dealt with him a couple of years ago because it was put to me by somebody that John Carr might have been the man who conceived of the Super 6 for the 1999 Cricket World Cup. He denies that. He remembers being in the meetings, but he doesn't think it was his idea, strictly speaking, but he knows he was there at the time. In any case, a long and distinguished career in the service of the game after he finished playing, and he had that marvellous season of 1,542 runs, beating Lara, and he completed it with 261 not out at Lords against Gloucestershire. 1994, it was the year.
The 261 for Doc Gallen could be the innings that was vital to averaging more than Lara in the greatest year that anybody can remember in the county champs. I love it. Doc Gallen, drop us a message, get in the DMs on Patreon. Let us know if we're anywhere near it. If we're not, as I suspect we might not be, give us a hint and we'll come back to it on Storytime at some stage in the weeks to come. It's what else is going to happen? Oh, Doc, did you know what? Here's a little turn up for the books. You get to give someone a slab. You get to give away a slab of Brick Lane beer, you can give it away to yourself if you happen to be in Australia, or if you're not, you can give it away to anybody else who's in Australia. Or even if you are in Australia and you don't want it and you'd like to give it to someone else, you can do that. All of these things are within your power. They're all within your control. Brick Lane make delicious beverages. You might have heard about them off the top of the show. If you're someone who enjoys that sort of thing, hop into, I don't know, a can of the One Love Pale Ale or the Backyarder Session Lager, or, you know, the low alcohol offerings that they've got as well. They've got sours full of fruit. They've got all kinds of things. You can have a look at their website, bricklanebrewing.com, and check them out.
Yeah, it's something you can look forward to if you're in lockdown in Melbourne at the moment. When we're out of lockdown, when you're out of lockdown, I should say, I still feel like a Melburnian when seeing the obvious challenges that are going on in Victoria and around Australia at the moment. You can visit them at their tap room. They're at the Queen Victoria Market. That's going 4 nights a week. Or in Dandenong South, which is where I'm from, in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne. We've noted before that they use world's best practice standards with making their beer, which means they emit fewer emissions than they otherwise would. They use local resources. Use less water especially. They use lots of local resources, which means they hire lots of local staff. It's great for the local economy there in Victoria, proudly Australian owned. So, yeah, we are thrilled to be associated with Brick Lane. They're wonderful supporters of ours. And we keep getting these photos in on Twitter, which I love, of people tagging in Brick Lane and tagging in us when they're enjoying a beer, which they bought from the bottle shop at the moment. You can do that too, and follow them on social media in their handles. As Jay mentioned in his what do you call the bit Jay does at the start? It's his voiceover. It's his voiceover at the start. There's also a Brick Lane Brewing hoodie. I know we're coming to the end of winter in Melbourne, in Australia, and a hoodie may not be... You
can wear a hoodie in Melbourne in January. Like, you never know.
That's right. You will need a hoodie, and if you're in other parts of Australia as well, there will be another winter, and you will have a nice Brick Lane hoodie, and in the process, you'll be helping out the final word. So let them know that we sent you, and that will be lovely. They are doing the right thing by us. bricklanebrewing.com.au. Jeff, we're going to take a break, and after it we're going to be talking to Emma John about the important work that she's been doing, and after that we're going to talk a little bit more about the great game of cricket. It's the final word with Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon, and I'm sitting in the living room in North London of Guardian journalist, former Wisden Cricket Monthly writer. She's worked pretty much everywhere, really. Acclaimed author as well. It's Emma John. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Emma, off the top, the conversation we're about to have between two white men and a white woman, it might seem a fraction unusual to be having a conversation about black cricketers in England, but that's what you've been writing about recently for The Guardian over the weekend. There's been an extraordinary documentary made called You Guys Are History by Mark Butcher, which you are going into as well. On the final word in the past, we've had a number of people on talking about issues around race and cricket in England, but given you've been on the tools of late, it felt like the right time to talk to you and about what we've all, I suppose, learnt from watching and reading over the last 12 months especially. What got you into this? What was the reason why you thought this was a topic that you were going to sink your teeth into?
Well, I mean, I should say straight off the bat, this was entirely inspired by the documentary.
Right.
Patrick Marks made this fantastic documentary, You Guys Are History. It was on Sky, and they put it on during the lunchtime intervals at the Oval Test. But we got advance notice that was happening. And part of the reason I knew that was happening was because Tom Shaw, quite separately, the photographer Tom Shaw, is doing a project. He describes it as a personal project, actually, where he has been taking portraits of all 21 England cricketers to play for England, all 21 black cricketers to play for England. And so he had, that's something I also knew about, partly because that exhibition is going to hang at Lord's, in the museum at Lord's next year. So I knew that was coming up because I'm a little bit involved with the museum at Lord's, being on the Heritage and Collections Committee at MCC. So there's this anniversary. It's 40 years since Roland Butcher became the first black cricketer to play for England. And there's these two projects that are both happening at the same time. Tom Shaw had also been talking to Patrick Marks and Mark Butcher, who were making the documentary, and he'd got involved with that. And actually, in a way, that's one thing that's been really nice about this, is that it's a subject that is so big and so important that there's been a real kind of sharing of the stories, that everyone is just keen to share these stories. And when I said to, Patrick Marks, we'd like to do this piece for The Guardian, he was very, very happy to, be like, yes, who can, and Tom as well, when we said, Tom, want to run these pictures of yours in The Guardian. Yes, great. How can we help put you in touch with people? Let us tell you what they've been talking to us about. Let us give you all the information. Let us show you the documentary ahead of time. Because I think, everybody feels like this is a subject that just definitely needs to be talked about more and understood more by people. I would say people like me who've grown up, with an England team that actually had, quite a few black cricketers playing in it, quite a few sort of heroes, England heroes. And the fact that these numbers are in decline, that hasn't really been talked about. The fact that these cricketers actually experienced, some pretty racial stereotyping in the way that they were talked about, including by the media, hasn't really been talked about. So that was how it sort of came to be, was that the people who had already done the work, which is Tom Shaw and Patrick Marks and Mark Butcher, who did the interviews, very much kind of, came to me and said, this is what we've got.
Right, yeah, some fairly confronting, harrowing examples of explicit racism, which is spelled out in both your piece and the documentary. I think for mine, and you touched on it there a little bit in your first answer, that we're being told that as white people we need to listen. It's not so much about what we think and our impressions of what we've seen. It's like listen, pay attention, acknowledge. And I think that your piece largely does that. I mean, it's in the words of a number of former black cricketers and who've been through the system, who've had these experiences, and you kind of went to work in talking to them and telling their stories.
Yeah, and as somebody who works in media, it's really confronting and challenging, to be honest, because it makes you immediately think, wait, what have I written in the past? What narratives have I contributed to? What have I repeated unthinkingly? That is, that could be just prolonging a stereotype or have been derived from some kind of stereotype. Chris Lewis for me is the real one. Chris Lewis is somebody I didn't talk to for my piece, actually. He's somebody who comes up in the documentary, and he gave a brilliant and apparently incredibly kind of long and detailed interview with Mark Butcher. So I think there's every chance that there will be a lot that whole interview might come out separately at another point, because there's a whole load of things that Chris Lewis talked about in that interview which didn't make it into what is has to be quite a highly edited documentary. And for me, reading and listening to him say in the documentary about how he understood what Jofra Archer was going through, when Jofra gets told, when the narrative around Jofra Archer's bowling is, why isn't he bowling fast all the time? He makes it look so easy. So how come, he can bowl that fast at Lords in the Ashes, but then in the next game, he's down a few miles an hour. He doesn't look so threatening, and this kind of insidious sense that because we're looking at it and it looks so easy, and because there are these kind of racial stereotypes of athletes' bodies and black athletes' bodies and how easy things come for them, and then plus the extra, very historic racial stereotyping of things that are way worse than that. Laziness. I mean, that's one that Chris Lewis talked about. Yep. The idea that this black guy is he's just not really up for it. He's too laid back. I mean, laid back is the classic word, isn't it? Because that's what's been associated with so much Caribbean cricket down the years, and it's insidious because it kind of works against the idea that people are actually like busting their gut and doing their very best. So that was one that was really challenging for me, Chris Lewis, because I immediately thought, oh my goodness, I know that I've written about, I know that as a kid, as a teenager, I was certainly very much, aware of those, the Sun called him the Pratt without the hat when he went to the West Indies in 93, 94 and got sunstroke. And that was like a big part of the narrative around Chris Lewis, was like, oh, he's just quite stupid. He just doesn't really think. He's not really thoughtful about his cricket. Everything's just a bit too kind of chill and relaxed. And you can see already like where the racial stereotyping is coming there. And it's confronting for me as somebody who would definitely have kind of just absorbed that narrative, probably repeated it, and then somebody who, equally wrote a book about 90s cricket in which I know I mentioned Chris Lewis. I mean, I'm immediately thinking, I need to look back at, what did I write? How did I write it?
The question of perception is a big one. One thing that jumped out for me in both your piece and the documentary was Phil de Freitas. When I think about players who are racially stereotyped, there are players who were sort of around the edges of the team for a little while but didn't have substantial careers, or even someone like Devon Malcolm, who had amazing moments but was always talked down, was always sort of undermined in terms of his actual ability. You look at someone like de Freitas and at a glance you think, okay, well, he had a substantial career for England, and the immediate sort of assumption that I could make is, well, he therefore didn't have problems. He wasn't excluded on a racial basis or whatever it was. And he also wasn't someone who talked about that, who gave any impression that that was the kind of thing that was going on. And then we hear from him in the doco and in the article where he says, well, absolutely all these things were happening, but he didn't feel it was safe to talk about it. It wasn't in his career interest to talk about it, because if you did, you got branded as the difficult, as being difficult. The problem was with you if you complained about being on the receiving end of racial abuse or discrimination. So it was all about having to keep his mouth shut through his whole career and pretend that none of this stuff was happening. And it's not surprising, I guess, to hear this, but it is still confronting to hear it from someone who, on the surface, I might have imagined wasn't on the receiving end of things nearly as much as others were.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting. So Philip de Freitas, for instance, I have a feeling that I had once read, maybe, I think I might once have read, maybe in a Phil Tufnell book, one of his many autobiographies, a line in passing about Daffy getting death threats. I think that story may well have kind of been known. And when I say been known, I mean just that. I think it might have been known, obviously, by England teammates and whatever. What's interesting is that it was never told. That was not a story that was, that was shocking in any way. That was not a story that was, held up and there wasn't kind of a groundswell of why aren't we doing something about this, or indeed a kind of empathy for a player of like, gosh, think what, as he sort of said in my piece, can you imagine what it's like to stand at the end of your run-up at a test match when you've received death threats?
Yeah, when the National Front are saying they might have a sniper on the roof,
and how that might affect your body. I think that's a massive change in our societal culture, isn't it? That we now think about these things and we encourage empathy, and we do try and take a step back and think about what's happening in other people's minds and in other people's situations, instead of just putting our own judgments, our own value judgments, which are always kind of informed by some kind of prejudice because they're coming out of our own eyes, and so they're informed by our sense of values and our sense of judgment and what we perceive of other people. And I just think that shows you, gosh, how much our society has changed in even that short period of time. That was only the 1990s.
Yeah, and it feels like, even though it's only maybe 20 or 30 years ago in some cases with some of these players, that these memories have been, and this is a recurring theme of Butcher's documentary. They've not been at the surface; they've been brought to the boil in recent times. They've felt. I think De Freitas describes it as a relief because he's never trusted anyone to have these sorts of conversations. I mean, yes, there were some well-documented examples during his career, for example, the Wisden Cricket Monthly piece, which we might come to in a moment, but just the idea that there are all of these stories. I mean, the one that you have to start your piece about Sid Lawrence with the banana peel as a 17-year-old lad. I mean, can you imagine going through that? And I suppose the only way they were able to get through it, and again, this is a bit of a theme in the documentary, was to not make it much of their public persona. It was to internalise it so that they could get on with trying to make a living out of cricket.
Yeah, and so I can tell you like how difficult it has been for those people. As you know, as much as obviously Daffy did say it was a relief, and I was surprised, you know, that people who had spent a long time talking to Mark Butcher in these interviews and who had, you know, and those would have been really, those would have been really difficult conversations to sit down. They've got a camera on them. I know Mark spent, you know, an hour or two with some of those people in the documentary.
And he said he was stunned as well. I mean, he said it wasn't something that was even really on his radar as a player, and that what he was hearing back to him, sort of the feedback he was getting from these players he was interviewing, that stunned him, and that's as a black cricketer himself.
Yeah. So I genuinely thought after that, I thought there's every chance when I phone these guys, they're going to say they don't want to talk to me.
Right.
Because, you know, they've just done that. They've just dredged a lot of stuff up. They've just been through this. They may well say, well, hold on, you know, it was one thing sitting down and pouring out my heart to Mark Butcher for an hour or two. You know, I've done that now. I would like to kind of, you know, close the lid, or, you know, just let that speak for itself. I was really surprised at how quickly both Dave Lawrence and Philip De Freitas said to me, yeah, absolutely, love to talk to you, and how immediately open they were with me. You know, again, you know, somebody who, you know, they're just talking to on the end of a phone in this case. But the fact that it was new to them to talk about this stuff was very apparent. And something in my piece, in the opening of my piece, I said, you know, I talked about what happened when Dave Lawrence started telling this story about the banana skin, and he basically he started telling it. He started telling the story. He told me what happened, and then he started to tell me about his reaction to it, and he just stopped talking. And I didn't write this in the piece because I didn't really want it to be the focus of the piece, but he wept. He just wept on the other end of the phone. And so, you know, there was a good kind of, I don't know, 40 to 50 seconds of just, you know, we were just both there knowing that, you know, he's reliving this awful thing, and that it's really, really hard for him to think about and talk about. And I, yeah, that was one of those times when, as a journalist, you're like, I've not really been in this situation before. And we've talked about why listening is important. You know, for me, again, that was a really confronting, challenging experience. You know, I've interviewed a lot of sports people. I've interviewed a lot of emotional sports people. I interviewed Tom Daley, like I stood, you know, as close to Tom Daley as as we're sitting now, right after he crashed out of the 2016 Olympics. And, you know, I had to stand there with a microphone like this and ask him, you know, like how you
what went wrong,
and he, you know, he just, you know, welled up with tears in front of me, and that was, I remember that being a really, like, that was a rough gig, and thinking, I'm not enjoying this. But I've never experienced anything like that. Like, I've never felt anything like that as I did when I was on the phone today, because I was like, I actually genuinely, I don't know what to say, and actually words are kind of almost meaningless in this context, and so I probably should not say anything. So that's what I decided to do. And Dave was brilliant, and he you know, he then came back and you know, carried on, and you know, we talked for another 40 minutes after that, and it was, yeah, it was a pretty humbling experience, I would say.
The thing that Mark Butcher said about being surprised by it, and we spoke to him on the show a few months ago, and we didn't talk about race in cricket a lot. We did talk about it a little bit, but one of the things that it made me think was that when you're white or when you're outside any sort of level of oppression for any particular reason, you get the luxury of being surprised by hearing about it. You get to be shocked by it because it's not part of your everyday life. And all of the black cricketers would know and would have spoken to each other about it, presumably, and it's no surprise to any of them. Mark talked about it in terms of that he didn't have to face it personally because he was the son of Alan Butcher, who was a Surrey legend, and so he was brought up at Surrey and got to play for Surrey, and he always got to be himself first before being identified as a racial stereotype. But it also seemed to me that ties into a thing that you see in almost all kinds of oppression, where the people doing the oppressing want to have a few safe sort of examples of the people they are oppressing to be in their inner circles, to be their friend, so that they can have plausible deniability. They can say, I'm not racist. Well, our club's not racist. We've got Mark Butcher. He plays for us. He's black, and that makes it okay because they've got someone from that minority group who's deemed safe.
Hey, you're talking to someone who was in a press box, 20 years ago when she was the only woman in the press box.
Yeah.
I know that. I've seen that work.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, we're not sexist because Emma John's in there. We're not racist because Mark Butcher plays for the club. That part of it seems as important as anything else, that it's like if you do the right things and behave in the right way, then you might get admission as the one approved green tick member of that group who's allowed in. And then as long as you don't rock the boat, don't raise any trouble, don't talk about it, like Phil de Freitas style, keep your mouth shut about it and don't make trouble, and then you'll be allowed to keep being part of the inner sanctum.
Oh my goodness! I mean, yeah. I mean, that is absolutely describing some experiences that I had right at the start of my career as a woman in the press box, and things happened. Being treated in a certain way by male journalists who were a lot older and in a position of, considerable power, and thinking, you just have to suck it up. You want to be here. You don't rock the boat. And I think that is why it is. That's why what all of us have gone through in the past year or two, but really, really since the George Floyd killing and the reactions and the mass kind of protest, but also the mass awareness that was just like, people have been saying this stuff about structural racism forever, and finally there's a pause, there's a point in time when those of us who have just lived in and benefited from structural oppression for ages actually for a start see it, because it's been put so clearly in front of us, and like we're finally in a situation where we're listening maybe. I think one of the things that I found really interesting in talking to American friends, for example, I've got a lot of American musician friends. So a lot of friends in the music industry have been saying to me, one of the things that they're really kind of grappling with now in their careers is, it's not, you listen and that is great, but you actually have to inconvenience yourself. There's like, we're at this point now where we all have to, and for all sorts of reasons, not just racism, but so many structures. Climate crisis is another really good example. It's like, we all know, none of us have any excuse anymore. We all know that we're bound up in these structural systems of whatever it is, capitalism, historic racism, all of these things, historic sexism, everything, and it's all very well to know, but just as Jeff's just said, it's not enough to be like, well, but we're okay because we've got this one friend, or we're okay because we've got this one person in our office. It's like, no, you actually, as an individual, have to start inconveniencing yourself. You have to actually start laying down some of the benefits that you have, and that is really hard, I think, for people to do.
Yeah, ignorance is no form of defence here anymore in a way that it probably never was, but was often rolled out. Climate change, good comparison there, I suppose. It's not as though anyone can claim they don't understand what is going on there on that front, and much the same here and what's happened over the last 12 months. I just want to go back to an era that you're really familiar with, your celebrated book about England's cricket in the 90s. A number of those players talked to you and talked to Butch. A theme there of them playing in the Caribbean where they had been born in some cases. The go home thing, go home when they're in England and then they return back to the Caribbean, and they don't get particularly good treatment either, because there's a sense that they've left their homeland and are playing against their homeland when representing England. But also some lovely, touching and tender moments about Chris Lewis playing in front of his family in Guyana as well. But nonetheless, there's that contrast between what they're hearing away from home and what they're getting when they play at home. Then there's this piece of writing, which I must admit I've heard it referred to before, but I haven't really engaged with it, by Robert Henderson in the Wisden Cricket Monthly, as it was formerly construed. It's a different magazine now, but that as it was then. Where Phil DeFreitas and Devon Malcolm actually sued them and won, and the reason why they were so aggrieved by it, and they spoke about this, was the idea that it was in the blood, so to speak, that Negroes, the word used in the piece, were going to be less committed to playing for England, and they were going to be lazy and not as committed to the cause as they would be if they were white players. And it was framed at the time as like a conversation we have to have and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that just wasn't even that long. I mean, that it's so extraordinary how not long ago that is, because
Yeah.
I joined Wisden Cricket Monthly. That was my first job in cricket journalism, was working for them. And I joined them when in sort of early 2000s, and that was still an absolutely live issue.
The piece, as it were. Yeah.
It had. I don't know how many years were in between. I can't quite remember, but it was still something that was a very raw, very awful, part of the magazine's history.
Yep.
And extraordinary to think that, at that time you could absolutely, somebody could write that. Somebody could genuinely sort of, with a sort of almost, it's that kind of classic, there's almost a scientific air to this, that kind of fake false science, that Nazis used to use.
Yeah, eugenics, whatever it's called.
Where it's like, I mean, there's got to be some kind of, scientific evidence here that there's, a difference between the races, or, whatever it is. And, I mean, again, something that, actually, when I look back and I think the way that was handled, obviously there was an apology and Daffy and Devon won their case and all the rest of it. But the way that I guess everybody else just sort of saw it as a kind of this kind of sort of sideshow thing that's happened. It wasn't. It just wasn't as big a deal as it should have been.
Yeah, and yet, 2.5 decades on from that piece, maybe even longer, the Jofra Archer example from 2019 is a big part of the documentary, explaining how he knew, and I thought this was fascinating, how he knew when watching the Euros final shootout this year, that he put himself in those shoes and said, well, look, if we didn't win the 2019 World Cup in that super over that he sent down, he knows it would have been the same for him, the online abuse. So it's kind of the modern iteration of what we're seeing now. You can even spot it and identify it in the comments underneath Sky Cricket's Twitter account or other social media platforms when they put out clips around, this documentary in the last week. A number of people reply and just won't have it. They just won't have this. And, you kind of sense that if you were a black athlete in the modern era, playing for the England cricket team, it would be hard work knowing that these pelters will end up, these racist pelters will end up in your replies at some stage or another when you perform poorly on the field, which will happen to any professional athlete. So it's not about sort of saying, well, racism was a thing back then. For cricketers in that generation, it's still a very live issue for the modern players who are representing England at the moment, Jofra Archer and Chris Jordan.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, you know, and it's interesting, isn't it? Like, so talking to Patrick, the documentary maker, when I was trying to get a steer on, you know, I'd essentially love my piece to kind of supplement your documentary in the sense because, you know, you've done lots of research, you've got a documentary that is only going to be an hour long in total, so you've had to miss a lot of stuff and cut a lot of stories and you know, whatever. He was giving me this just real précis of, you know, well, here are some people who had a lot to say, and here are some people who were like you know, I had a really negative experience. And then here are some people who, you know, Dean Headley, for example.
Oh, the Dean Headley bit. I mean, even then, what I was saying then about Archer and Jordan, the fact they still get called lazy and soft and all the rest of it, which is exactly what Headley experienced as a player 25 years ago. I mean, he
very much sort of says, oh, you know, and he says it in the documentary. He says, you know, I didn't have any, you know, I never suffered because of the colour of my skin, and I thought it was really interesting, you know, because. But
didn't you find that little caveat he gave at the end even more instructive? That he goes, well, I didn't have an issue with the colour of my skin. However, I still had to endure all of these stereotypes that, as you point out in your answer before, invariably come up about black athletes.
And this is it. I mean, I just think, there's a lot of, and obviously people like Jofra and Chris Jordan, again, they're going to be completely circumscribed about what they say. I mean, despite the fact that it's there in you know, it's there on social media, it's there. Like I was going to say in black and white, but maybe, you know, since we're mostly talking about Twitter, in blue and white, you know, it's there. Like, but at the same time, they will be careful and considered in what they say because they are black players in a white dominated environment, and they don't want it to be, they won't want it to be all that's talked about. They won't want it to be the way they're perceived. They won't want it to be, you know, all these things that we've just been talking about you know, how you navigate the world when these issues are around you.
And the elephant in the room on all of this is participation rates, which, you know, as Butch has in his way of explaining it, there were 33 black players in the county championship in the mid-90s. There are 9 today, so a 70% decline. I think that number's on the rise as well, and that's since, you know, that's just the last 20 years or so. So, I mean, and it's not just about the playing fraternity, it's off the field too. Mark Elaine speaks powerfully about doors that might not have been as open as they should have been for him as a coach, even lower level coaching roles as well that have been gone through in the doco. So it's a game-wide thing, and I found it interesting that Ebony's observation was that upon realising that these narrow pathways weren't bringing black cricketers through, or black people full stop, into a game, they had to develop their own pathway, thus the ACE program, which is now got national charity status but started at Surrey a couple of years ago. But, I mean, it feels like it is going to be a big job now to arrest this decline, and I'm sure work like this will help contribute to that. But, they are stark numbers, aren't they? It's unavoidably the case.
And it's so interesting because actually a lot of the people who spoke about that, Ebony, Mark Elaine, Dave Lawrence, you know, said the same thing to me. It's like, actually Daffy said, they all said the same thing. There was like, they don't kind of, you know, it's never kind of personal racism that is that they blame, you know, they would blame this on. I mean, we're talking again about kind of structures.
Yeah.
And so I've just written a piece today about what Lancashire are doing to encourage the better engagement with South Asian population. And one of the things that I really I've come down to is that inclusion is just about thoughtfulness. It's so rarely, exclusion is so rarely about, you know, personal prejudice. It's just not thinking about the other person. Exactly what Ebony said about, you know, the fact that Surrey hadn't, you know, nobody at Surrey had really, even though the Oval is traditionally the ground that was like the home, the heartland for West Indian support. in the UK, and you could literally see the ground changing. You could literally see the crowds changing since, you know, those great kind of those great images we all have in our heads of the late 70s, early 80s, of, you know, the crowd being full of West Indian supporters and people from Caribbean heritage. And so people at the Oval, you know, they've lived and worked through 20 years of that decline, say more 30. But because the people in charge are white and are not black, they haven't necessarily thought, well, what do we do about that? Because they've thought, well, that's the black community's issue. That's kind of the Caribbean heritage community's issue themselves. It's, you know, it's that they're you know, that, and again, Daffy, Dave Lawrence, people said this to me, you know, football is more popular, football is more affordable, football is just a much bigger sport in this country.
And also you can see black footballers
and you can
day
see
in,
black
day out.
footballers. And so even Mark Elaine's son, you know, who's just signed for Manchester City, these, you know, these players who were kind of pioneers in their own regard, playing for England, their children, the next generation, did not feel like they were growing up with the same sort of love of cricket, and it really declined so fast when you look at it. You know, from Windrush generation to now, that's not many decades, and it's basically, again, you know, I'm saying this as all I'm trying to do is be a mouthpiece for what people have said to me.
Yeah.
But what those players said to me, what Dave Lawrence, Daffy, these people said, you know, their parents' generation, cricket was a really, really big deal. You know, it was a really big part of the Caribbean identity and the identity of a Caribbean immigrant in England. And so for them growing up, you know, they absorbed that. It was a big part of their identity. That's gone. Dave Lawrence says, I don't think you're ever going to get that back.
Yep.
And I think in some ways, you know, maybe that thread has been lost. What you can do, and what Ebony is doing, is you just make an offer, essentially, of cricket to places, and we're talking, you know, inner city London in this case, that just doesn't have it and feels excluded from it. Not because, you know, their parents don't play it anymore, but because nobody plays it. You know, nobody plays it in the state schools, and I just think that's, yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think you know, Mark Elaine's point about coaches belongs there as well. You know, in the sense of, you know, if you can't see it, you can't be it, and there are not enough. I mean, we say not enough. There are not really any black coaches in the system. So of course that has a knock-on effect. And again, that's just thoughtlessness. You know, it is prejudice on one level. It's unconscious bias. It's all of these things. But changing that just is a case of people thinking and putting thought into things. And I do think that the more people talk about it, the more that will change. Because look at what the ECB is doing with South Asian populations now, and the way that they so many different programs to work on that. I think, again, Ebony said it. She said, you just have to have people from those communities, from those backgrounds, in positions of power. You have to have a black woman on the board in order to put this on anybody's radar. Once it's on somebody's radar, change happens, you know.
Absolutely. Nicely summed up. It might be that one thread has come to an end, but hopefully through conversations that have been had this week through the You Guys Are History documentary, your piece in the paper on the weekend as well, which people can access in all the usual ways. We can advance that because, of course, the game is so much richer and better for its diversity, and where that has diminished, it's incumbent upon all of us inside the game to do everything we can. And at the moment, it feels as though the best thing we can do is listen and help facilitate those conversations, and you've done a fine job in doing that. Emma John, thanks for rejoining The Final Word.
Thanks.
Good people doing good things, a thing that we like on this show. And where a whole lot of those good people congregate is at Lord's Taverners events. They raise money to put on programs across the UK and also other programs overseas. looking to particularly help kids and young people who are living with disability or living in disadvantaged situations. That's something that's even more front of mind after watching the Paralympics over the last couple of weeks, and a lot of the stories about the difficulty that so many of those athletes had in reaching the Paralympics, in getting the opportunities that they had to find sports that they could excel in. And that's the kind of thing that Lord's Tavs try to do with cricket, particularly using cricket as a mechanism to help out kids who need it. And they do that by raising funds in a whole lot of different ways. And there are a few of those coming up.
Yes, there are. And yeah, I share that sentiment. I worked on the Paralympics in 2012 and it was one of the most rewarding things I've done in my life, and the people I met through that experience, lifelong friends. So, I like it that what Lord's Tavs do runs alongside the spirit of the Paralympics, and it does mean that when it comes to raising funds for those, be it living with disability or at a disadvantage in other parts of their life, that we're able to help support that on the Final Word. Coming up on September the 12th, for example, is the Great North Run. That's a half marathon. The Brighton Marathon's on the same day. Lord Tavs supporting that as ever. It's too late to run, but you can donate or get down to cheer people on. There's a range of golf days coming up in the next couple of weeks as well. Basically, because we can get outdoors and do stuff again, that means the Lord's Tavs are in overdrive raising money. There's a game today. The Lord's Tavs have been playing up at Wormsley. I think they were playing the Authors 11 today, which is a club, Jeff, you and I have had a bit to do with over the years. So, this is a really great time to hopefully offer yourself to make a contribution if you want to, and there are other fun ways too. It doesn't have to be some physical crazy challenge. You can do it in a less stressful, straining way.
Well, if you don't want to get out and about and you want to stay home, this particularly tickled me because I love some of the random ideas that people come up with for things that might be fun. So September 15th, this is something you can still get involved with.
Okay.
They're doing an online live cook-along. Now, if we're talking about randomness here, right, you pay 40 quid, and then they send you a box of ingredients, and they send you a bunch of free beers as well, which have been donated, so they come included. And you get online and you do an online course where you get taught to make Indian food by Matthew Hoggart and Farouk Engineer together at last.
Well,
on the live stream.
I'm going to do this. I mean, provided I don't know what I'm doing work-wise that day, but if I can learn how to cook with Farouk Engineer. I mean, the man's had a few hot meals, let's be honest. He knows his way around a curry, Farouk Engineer. He gets shown up every time anyone's playing at Lord's, really. He's often there, entertaining and generally being a wonderful member of the cricketing community, Farouk Engineer. And the fact that Matthew Hoggart's thrown into the mixture as well, I'm sure he knows his way around a tikka chicken masala as well, that being the national dish over here. So what a great combination. 15 September. Who wouldn't want to be part of that? If you're listening right now and you want to do that with me, provided I can do it around work, not looking at my schedule, I'd love to do it with a few people from the Final Word Patreon community. That'd be a lot of fun.
So a couple of weeks after being asked by Jonathan Agnew whether he ever sold Christmas trees, Matthew Hoggart has found himself teaching people how to make Indian food. They do have support, I should note. They've got an actual chef with them, Nidhi Verma, who's an Indian specialist chef. So, I'm not sure how much heavy lifting Hoggy will be doing in terms of, but he'll be there. And so that's, God, I love the kind of things people come up with. It's like, who doesn't want to be taught how to make cucumber raita by Matthew Hoggart? That's what I'd like to see. He can make a cucumber talk, that guy.
Absolutely. Lordstaverners.org. It's all in the show notes. We love supporting them, and it's wonderful having them as a partner of The Final Word.
This is The Final Word with Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins. Or not so much Adam Collins, because he's just put the microphone down and run out the door so he can go and pick up Winifred from nursery. Adorable. Thanks, Emma John, for making the time to speak to us today. And thanks to everybody for listening in. As you do, there would be no point making the show if you didn't do that. Hello, everybody watching on YouTube. Nice to get to know you all as well. People on Patreon particularly who fund this show and the weekend show and make it possible for us to keep putting together what we do week in and week out. We'll be back with the daily shows for the 5th test. Hopefully it's more cricket than rain, but we'll do them even if it's raining, I guess. Why not? Look, maybe I'll get an early night if there's a lot of rain, but we'll decide that when we get there. Thanks to Brick Lane for supporting the show, bricklanebrewing.com, and you can also check out lordstaverners.org if you want to see the good work that the Lord's Tavs are doing. We'll be back on the weekend with Story Time with Daniel Norcross, who's filling in this weekend, and on the daily shows, as mentioned, Jeff Lemon, Adam Collins. Final word. See you then.